I was never struck with the revelation that emergent gameplay, player agency, and solid narratives are the things that I enjoy the most in video games. It was more of a gradual process of enlightenment, something that might have started with the OG wizardry and matured until the original Fallout came out and made me say, this is it, this is what I want in my games. Arcanum, Baldur's Gate 2, Deus Ex, and a few other titles from the early to mid-2000s served to galvanize this notion, and they helped me realize that the things that I appreciate the most in games also happen to be the pillars of the RPG genre. Though of course some live up to those expectations a lot more than others. But over the course of the last, 10 years or so, I also became gradually aware that those things that I've always enjoyed the most about video games have become progressively scarcer in the mainstream space. Those AAA behemoths with all their cutscenes and flashy action have been getting more and more on rails, and they seem to be giving less and less of a shit about how I want to play them. Luckily, I have also discovered the underground hovel where like-minded developers seem to have fled to, the glorious indie gaming space. Well, mostly glorious. Okay, sometimes glorious. Okay, the not so glorious space with notorious glorious spots. Yeah, that seems a bit more accurate. After stumbling upon games like Underrail, Age of Decadence, Outward, Kenshi, and more recently Moonring, War Tales, and Colony Ship amongst many others, along with those rare exceptions that seem to be welcomed for some reason in mainstream spaces like Disco Elysium, I made it my duty, my mission, my purpose in life to come through the not-so-glorious space with notorious glorious spots in search for the next Underrail. But I'd be lying to you if I said that my search is always fruitful. Last year, I was lucky enough to strike gold with Moonring, but sometimes even the most highly anticipated titles turn out to be a total bust. And unfortunately, 2024 has had more than a few underwhelming and straight-out disappointing titles. And today I am going to share with you a list of RPGs that just didn't do it for me, despite the fact that they were mostly well received by most people. So without further ado, here's a list of RPGs that have come out in the year 2024 that didn't quite do it for me, from the ones I liked the most to the ones I've liked the least. Beyond Galaxyland. Coming up first is Beyond Galaxyland. This is the only title on this list that I cared about enough to play all the way through to the end. I wouldn't say it's a bad game, and there is a lot to like about it. My main gripe with this title is that it has been tagged RPG everywhere and by everyone. But I wouldn't say it's an RPG, it's not even an RPG-ish game in my book. If you are like me and you are looking for a title that lives up to the pillars of the genre, which is to say emergent gameplay and or player agency, you are better off looking elsewhere. There is no character creation in Beyond Galaxyland. You play as Duke, most of the time anyways. A teenager who finds himself a stranger in a strange galactic land, trying to save everything that's dear to him. And that's not a bad premise. And Duke isn't a bad character. He has a clearly defined personality that doesn't accommodate to what the plot needs from him. His motivations are relatable, solid, and grounded in verisimilitude, and he talks and acts like a teenager, which is what he is. And thankfully he's not one of the annoying ones. But like I said, there are no classes, races, attributes, feats, talent trees, nor anything else for you to fiddle around with. The game uses an experience progression system, but every time you level, the game automatically assigns your attributes, so you can forget about attributes adding anything to the build aspect of the game. As for skills, Duke and the other characters learn a few skills over the course of the game, but you have absolutely no choice in the matter. Nada. There is nothing for you to choose. You unlock these skills as you progress in the game's very extremely linear story, which means that you don't have a say in anything pertaining your character's skills or talents, and the game even tells you when you're supposed to use these skills. Beyond Galaxyland basically assumes that you are completely incompetent and unable to make decisions for yourself, or to even evaluate a battle and decide which skills to use given the situation. So, what about items? Is there anything good on the itemization end of things? Well, you find different items over the course of your adventure, and you can craft some others, including enhanced versions of some of the stuff you have. And you can equip various different items, so this is one aspect of the game over which you do have some agency. Your character's weapons, however, are the lowliest form of itemization that you are likely to find in an RPG. Duke, for example, gets a standard sword, which he then changes for a sword that has +1 strength. And later on in the game, he changes that one for a sword that has +2 strength. And that's it. There aren't different weapons with different stats, types of damage, or special effects. So weapons don't really add anything to the build aspect of your character's progression either. There are some side quests that aren't mandatory in this game, and some of them are quite off the beaten trail. And by completing some of these side quests, you can unlock some of the top tier weapons for your companions, so you got that going for you, which is nice, I suppose. But despite the lack of agency that you have over all of these things, which definitely makes Beyond Galaxy fail spectacularly as an RPG in my book, it does have one phenomenal idea that I would love to see in other RPGs. See, every creature you fight in Beyond Galaxyland can be captured and turned into a summon. Combat in Beyond Galaxyland is turn-based, and Duke's capture skill consumes his turn, and it doesn't always work. In fact, the more powerful the enemy, the less likely it is for this skill to work. And this makes this creature capturing mechanics interesting, because they are quite the risky gamble, and there is some opportunity cost attached to it. Also, every creature has a different set of talents, and they also gain experience and level up as you use them in combat encounters. They even learn new skills every certain number of levels. And the best part is that you can even capture bosses, and some of those are ridiculously badass. There is a problem with this though, and it's that the game's just too fucking easy. You don't ever really need to rely on your summons to beat a combat encounter. You don't really need to think about which summon to put on which character, or the items that would best synergize with them. And that's a pity, because these summon mechanics felt fresh and original, and they had great customization potential. But what about the other aspects of the gameplay mix? Are they any good? They are aggressively meh in my book. Let's start with the fact that the gameplay mix is all over the fucking place. There's platforming, stealth sections, racing sections, combat, and puzzle solving. But in my opinion, this blend of mechanics feels random and discombobulated. It never comes together into one cohesive whole. For example, early on in the game, you're asked to go out on a mission that requires you to do some very basic platforming, some chillaxy puzzle solving, and some combat. And you would think, oh, so this is Beyond Galaxyland's gameplay cycle, gotcha. But then puzzle solving goes out the window for like 15 hours before it makes another brief random appearance, only to fuck off again until and if you do a non-mandatory secondary mission almost near the end of the game. You also have racing challenges in this game, but the first one gets introduced roughly after 15 hours of gameplay, and it's your typical Knights of the Old Republic type of racing simulation event with a camera behind the vehicle. And if memory serves well, you can skip it altogether if you wish. In fact, you don't even need to win the race in order to get the item that you need to progress further into the story. You only need to participate in the race. So it's like a participation trophy that every kid gets nowadays in modern day schools. And this could give you the impression that racing is a secondary thing in this game, something that was thrown in to add a little variety to the gameplay mix. But much later in the game, you are obligated to participate in another racing event, but this time it's mandatory, and it features completely different mechanics and an isometric scenario. There is no way to skip it, and because the main story is 100% linear, there are no alternative ways to get the quest done. The same thing happens with the stealth sections. There are only 2 of them, and they are confined to one very specific mission, but they are mandatory. And although the stealth sections are almost harder to fail than they are to succeed at, they feel completely random and like something that I definitely did not ask for. And speaking of things that I didn't ask for, this game has hands down the king of features that I didn't ask for. See, the combat in Beyond Galaxyland is turn-based, and it very much resembles the style of JRPG turn-based combat that we had in games like Breath of Fire or Final Fantasy back in the day. But perfect parries are a thing in this game. Yup, you heard right. The devs decided to throw in a thumb-eye coordination challenge to their turn-based combat design because fuck you, player. And it's not only a thing, it's a very important thing. And it requires split-second timing, and every monster has different attack speeds and animations, which means it's a royal pain in the ass to get right. Luckily, even if you suck at perfect parries, winning combat encounters is still very viable because nothing in this game is all that challenging, but it still feels like a totally wrong mechanic to have in a turn-based game. Also, enemies are just walking about and you can start combat encounters by running into them, or you can strike them with your weapon to trigger the encounter and get the upper hand. And I also thought this was a stupid concept that didn't add anything to the gameplay mix. On a separate note, it must be said that I played this game on my computer and I found the controller scheme hideous, to the point that I preferred to play it on my keyboard despite the game's recommendation to use a controller. Combat itself is not terrible and some of the non-mandatory bosses are even pretty decent. And speaking of non-mandatory, secondary quest is where this game truly shines. They usually entail the best locations, the hardest challenges, the most interesting missions, the best enemies, and they add a decent amount of world building and details to the story. Beyond Galaxyland might have not been made in Japan, but it would have been much more accurate to label it a JRPG. Because let's see, you don't create your character. You level up, but the game increases your attributes automatically every time you do. You don't have a talent tree or skills to choose from when you level. You learn skills automatically as you progress through the story, and you have no agency over anything. And these are all the staples of the JRPG genre. The story, however, is much better than it usually is in your average JRPG. It's a simple, lean, efficient, straightforward, and unpretentious story about a teenager trying to save everything that's dear to him. Characters have believable and relatable motivations that are also grounded in verisimilitude, meaning that the game respects its own rules, not that it's realistic. And the story happens as a consequence of said characters setting forth to do what they believe they should do and running into people who have conflicting visions or plans. I like that none of the antagonists in this game are presented as cartoonish villains. Everyone is trying to do what they believe is best, the good guys and the bad guys alike. The story has some pacing issues at the beginning, but then it sort of hits its stride and maintains a very decent pace all the way through, story-wise that is. You have companions in this game, as well as NPCs that tag along for the ride, and they have their own reasons to join and see your mission through to the end. And the game does a phenomenal job of painting them as real people with personalities, goals, ambitions, and fears, without ever having to resort to information dumps. You get an idea of what Rosie and Pablo are like just by interacting with them, and sometimes they even take the wheel when the situation calls for it, and I thought that was pretty neat. Also, the game does not take itself too seriously, and you have a healthy number of humor snippets here and there that are very consistent with the game's overall wholesome vibe. I was not necessarily crazy about the ending, and there is a revelation near the end that you can see coming miles away. But other than that, while the narrative didn't flip my world upside down, it ended up being a lot more decent than I expected. It also has to be said that this game features amazing pixel art graphics. And nowadays, this style seems to be all the rage. But to me, Beyond Galaxyland stands head and shoulders above everyone else in the pixel art ballpark. Also, the game is only $9.99 in my region, which I think is a decent price for this title. But if you are expecting this game to be the next Underrail or the next Moonring, you are going to be sorely disappointed. It's a casual game for very casual RPG enjoyers, and I know you guys aren't that crowd. Space Prison. Coming up next is a title that I personally had very high hopes for. In fact, this was my most anticipated game out of the titles on this list. Space Prison is an RPG that takes place in a futuristic sci-fi dystopian setting. There is combat, exploration, and questing, but you engage in all of these things to improve your living conditions inside the prison and eventually try to make an escape. And the game partially succeeds in making all of these things interesting. I also love the tone of the game and the way it handles its humor. It's dark, unapologetic, and it features lots of tiny winks and nods to, well, us. You have stuff like a pinkest dungeon poster that you can find lying about and that you can take to decorate your cell. You have holographic space bunny aliens pole dancing, and then there is the fact that you've been sent to the ugliest, meanest hellhole in the galaxy to serve a life sentence for speeding. Yep, that's why you're in prison. Also, some of the situations and characters that you run into can be unexpectedly hilarious, and I absolutely approve of all of this. The game features a decent character creation system that allows you to choose a race and a class of sorts. Races are pretty decent. You get the generic humans, the badass floating alien creatures, and the muscle-bound space chicks. And all of them have racial abilities that seem insignificant at first, but have quite the impact on many aspects of the gameplay. Your class or specialty also defines the overarching strategy that you should be leaning into for combat situations, and it also has a marginal impact on how you navigate other aspects of the game. In Space Prison, you have to earn the favor of one of the two rival factions, and that means that you are going to have to do stuff for people. And there are at least two different ways in which you can deal with these quests, which is something that I always expect in an RPG. Regardless of which path you take, chances are that you're going to have to engage in combat. Combat is turn-based, and it takes place in a square grid. There are obstacles and hazards that you have to take into account for your battle plan, and you have a series of skills at your disposal, as well as a variety of permanent and consumable items. Itemization is a thing in this game, and you'd do well to procure the gear that works best with your game plan as soon as you get the chance. You can also recruit helpers and train little rats to help you out. You can even equip little brass knuckles on your rats, which I think is absolutely hilarious. And super OP. One of the game's specialties actually focuses on using rats, and I think this build in particular is super fun to play. Choosing to go down path A or path B to finish a quest usually involves exploring different areas of the ship, which is also quite interesting. There are little secret containers that you can build to store loot to progressively move to your room, so that you can use it to build gear and improve your accommodations. And the game does a pretty good job at making your prison cell feel like the true measure of your progress in the game. Every new place that you gain access to, every new piece of gear, every successful mission, everything eventually translates into an improvement on your cell, and I like it. Well, so far so good, right?
Wrong.
Listen, I can see some of you guys having a lot of fun with this title, but the thing is that this game does a few things that turn the whole experience into a not fun endeavor, and these things undo everything that's good about the game in my book. First, quests feel transactional. There is dialogue, there is some form of player agency, you unlock your faction's stronghold after you complete a couple of missions, and all of this is nice. But it never feels like your actions are changing anything around the prison. People will have the exact same things to say to you after you've completed missions for them. There is no overarching purpose that you can share with them, or anything that you can say to anyone to get them to cooperate with you towards a bigger goal. There isn't even a personal goal other than to make your life easier in prison to begin with. And no one is amenable to collaborate with you towards this end. So the stuff that you do for other people feels like something that you do to increase a certain score till it's good enough for you to unlock a new quest or perk. And that totally breaks the immersion for me, or maybe I'm used to heavily scripted CRPGs, which Space Prison isn't. Also, you can't save and restore in this game whenever you wish, and that's usually not a deal breaker for me, but there are so many things that can go wrong in so many ways for so many stupid reasons that not being able to restore becomes a royal pain in the ass. For example, some of the tools that you need to complete quests, like wrenches, crowbars, and screwdrivers, count as contraband. And it's easy to forget that you don't have the tool that you need to complete your next mission in a non-contraband slot, which in turn means that you can easily walk into a guard who can confiscate your tool and leave you hanging for the rest of the day. And whenever this happens, you have to gather new crafting materials to craft a new tool and try again the next day. In truth, you only really lose time whenever something like this happens, but in this day and age, that's a very valuable resource in real life. And these types of setbacks in Space Prison feel tedious and like something that you would definitely want to avoid by restoring a saved game. Also, when you die, your mind gets transplanted to a new vessel, which makes you a puppet master of sorts, but it also makes your character and your deaths feel irrelevant. I have started this game over 4 times already, hoping to avoid the mistakes that have resulted in critical failures in past runs. And this is a bad plan. I'm supposed to deal with the consequences of failing a mission. I'm supposed to deal with death even. But I just don't want to do that. I want to be able to save and restore and deal with negative consequences if I consider them to be acceptable, like you do in your average CRPG. But Space Prison has a different plan, and it's one that does not do it for me. But maybe it will for you, who knows. I am going to give it a few more shots because I really want to like it. And I'm gradually beginning to ease up to the mentality that you're supposed to have in this game, which is, if you can make your prison cell, or your party, or yourself a tiny bit better every day, it doesn't matter as much if you fail a mission. But I guess we'll have to wait and see how that goes. I make no promises though. Rogue Waters. This is a roguelite, pirate-themed strategy RPG, and I know that many of you don't care about roguelite, despise the pirate theme, and think that strategy RPGs aren't real RPGs. But I don't have a problem with any of these things, and Rogue Waters looked like a decent little palate cleanser to take a break from the real RPGs. So what went wrong? Why didn't this game do it for me? Well, let's find out. The gameplay cycle in Rogue Waters is pretty straightforward. You control a ship and you navigate a map that has combat and non-combat nodes. Non-combat nodes can be ports or treasure, and there are some decisions for you to make that usually involve some form of RNG. When a combat encounter starts, you engage in a very simple ship-to-ship battle, and whether you succeed or fail depends a lot more on the strategic decisions that you made before the fight, like choosing the right combination of cannons and ship gear, than on your decisions during the battle itself. But there is, I'm not gonna lie, an interesting strategy aspect to this little mini-game. Are you going to trade blows with the enemy and focus on wiping out their modules and crew before the fight even starts? Or are you going to defend your own stuff? As I got deeper into the game and discovered new and different cannons, I got progressively more invested in these ship-to-ship battles, because they have quite a significant impact on the deck skirmish that follows. And I learned that doing well in these battles could even mean that you could win the encounter before it started, or lose it. As for the party-based portion of the combat, I can best describe it as XCOM in tight spaces. You fight a handful of enemies atop the enemy's ship deck, and you have to use your party members' skills and the hazards and ropes that you find on deck in combination to figure out puzzle-like situations. Your party is a combination of regular trash pirate mates and recruitable companions that have special skills. And these special skills can be quite strategic once you figure out the ropes. The game is run-based, like your average roguelite, and at the beginning of the run you can choose to purchase certain items and recruit certain allies. And over the course of the run, you find gear that you can equip on your party members and stuff with which you can upgrade your ship. Boss battles have special rules, they take place in broader areas, and they usually involve new stuff that you have not dealt with before up until that point. You may also summon the help of a kraken, and it's quite fun, I'm not gonna lie. The whole gameplay cycle is, really. My very big problem with this game is how it handles its meta progression. In all fairness, many roguelites fail to hit that sweet spot that makes you feel like you are getting farther in the game each time, because you are getting better. Games like Hades and Darkest Dungeon 2 certainly reward you quite a bit for simply playing the game, even if you play it badly. But in my experience, in both of these titles, you get the feeling that you are getting farther each time because you are getting better at the game, and not just because you've unlocked this or that weapon skill. But that's not the case with Rogue Waters. I think this game totally shoots itself in the foot with its meta progression mechanics. And the harder the difficulty, the more evident it becomes that the game rewards you a heck of a lot more for playing the game than for getting good at it. I like that your crew members get lingering conditions and wounds that can only heal over time if they stay at your stronghold. So you need to manage your crew members across multiple runs, and this mitigates the flat progression system that inevitably makes you better with each run regardless of how you play the game, but it's not enough to compensate the fact that the exact same strategies that can barely get you through the first area during the first few runs will be good enough to carry you all the way through the finish line after you've been playing 30 or 40 hours. And this means that you are eventually going to get through the game after putting X number of hours into it without ever changing your approach to combat, because your unlocked skills and items are going to do all the heavy lifting for you. And this just sucks ass in my book. And last we have Drova Forsaken Kin, a game that a lot of people seem to be losing their shit over.
Why? Why? Why?
Good for them, I guess. But after a few hours of playing this game, all I can say is...
Really?
I don't get it. I just don't see why people are oh-boying and oh-wowing about this one. I also don't understand why a good chunk of the game's fanbase insists on comparing Drova to Gothing, but well, I guess there's also people out there who say Outward is a Souls-like, so go figure. I have a lot of problems with Drova. First, I have issues with the narrative aspect of this title. At the beginning of the game, the main character is sort of thrusted into a no-return kind of situation. And the two hooks that are supposed to get you going are the fact that you need to find a way back home, and that you need to figure out a situation that might potentially be dangerous to your people. A bit like looking for the water chit in Fallout. Except, in Fallout it's very clearly obvious what is going to happen if you don't find the water chit. Drova's introduction, on the other hand, failed to generate a sense of urgency or to present me a mystery that I'd be genuinely interested in solving. So from then on out, I just didn't care about the people in this game or their predicament. It also doesn't help that NPCs in this game talk, think, and act in ways that come off as way too modern for the times depicted. And hey, I know even Baldur's Gate has moments like this, but in Drova it's everyone everywhere at all times, and that makes it impossible for me to become immersed in the experience, at least from the narrative perspective. The game also engages in lengthy, boring exposition dumps, and that's a sign of writers that don't respect their audience or their own ability to weave the characters' personalities and motivations into their actions and dialogues, as well as the overall premise of the plot. There are two factions in this game, and both of them are shitty, and you have no agency over the role you play in their plans. You just have to go along with them. Quests feel fetch questy, not only because, well, they are fetch quests, but also because they are framed as transactions. I always like to refer to Offra's quest in Pillars of Eternity as a good example of a fetch quest that doesn't feel transactional or like filler content. The narrative aspect of that quest is brilliant in its simplicity. It's used as a seamless and organic way to convey more information about White Wind's legacy and what it means to the people of the Dyrwood. It paints the picture of simple townsfolk who are desperate to find a solution to a problem and are willing to believe any story that gives them a modicum of hope. And it introduces you to unscrupulous individuals who take advantage of these types of situations for their own benefit. But that's not how quests work in Drova. It's just go there, do this, and come back. But the reasons that you are given to go out and do shit 80% of the times tell you nothing about the world at large or its characters, and when it does, it's via a clumsy information dump that'll have you rolling your eyes like a fucking slot machine in a casino. Character progression is another big letdown in this game. You create a character at the beginning of the game and choose a keepsake, and that's it. There are no attributes, classes, or feats for you to learn. And that's okay. Some games like Moonring or Outward don't have any of these things either. But in Outward, for example, you can only learn skills by paying specialized trainers. But in order to get to these trainers, and in order to be able to afford them, you need to set out on an adventure and survive the ordeal. And there are very big risks attached to this. The Hermit in Chersonese, for example, can only be reached after you brave the ancient ruins and spend an entire in-game day on the trip. And once you get there, you'll see that you need a fuck ton of money to be able to afford it. So the progression aspect of the game in Outward effectively rewards players for making the most out of what the game is supposed to be about. Going out there, taking risks, and making your own way through the game's goals. But that's not how it is in Drova. Over the course of the game, you level up, because the game uses an experience-based progression system, but the problem is that when you level, there's nothing for you to do. You need to look for a trainer and get him or her to teach you one of the many skills that are supposedly at your disposal. There are trainers scattered throughout the world and you need to look for them if you want them to teach you the good stuff. But first, the feeling of adventure in this title is nowhere near the feeling of adventure that you get in Outward, basically because the risks are reduced to zero. You always come back to life when you die, you can save and restore at will, the game autosaves constantly, and you have lots of other safety nets that make the world feel unthreatening, and this just cheapens or straight out murders the feeling of adventure, at least to me. So getting to a trainer feels just tedious and inconsequential. Second, the skills that you learned aren't even that great to begin with. They don't look cool in theory, and they don't feel cool to play in practice. I have not finished the game, and by the looks of it I won't either, but so far skills feel like more potent ways to execute the same basic attacks. Maybe it gets better down the line, but so far I am not impressed in the slightest. Combat also feels atrocious to play in my book. In CRPGs, you usually have real-time with pause or turn-based combat mechanics. In ARPGs, you usually have real-time combat. And when it's an isometric hack-and-slash type of ARPG, you dispatch waves upon waves of enemies in whatever way your class and build are meant to. And it seems to me like Drova is trying to be a CRPG as far as its narrative and its quest design goes, and an ARPG as far as the action goes. But it fails miserably as both of these things. Combat is real time, but you only ever face a handful of enemies. And that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. This is more or less the case with Shadows Awakening, and that is a great game. But in that game you have to figure out each combat encounter. Better yet, you have to figure out how to use your character's skills to sort out combat situations. In Drova, this sorting out translates into timing each enemy's incoming attacks, moving or dashing out of the way, and taking advantage of windows of opportunity to punish the bad guys. Combat is cheesable, but many enemies are damage spongy as fuck, and that's a really bad combination that gets really tedious really fast. Also, you have modes in this game, a combat and an off-combat mode. And in my book, 90% of the times, modes is something that happens when the devs are not capable of making all their mechanics work seamlessly. And I'm afraid this is very much how Drova feels. It seems like the devs just didn't know how to make looting, combat, and dialogue work together, so they came up with modes. Exploration is probably where this title quote-unquote shines. There are many caves and landmarks that are off the beaten trail, and there's interesting loot, NPCs, and even quests to be found. That is probably the one thing that kept me playing this game for as long as I did. But again, the game's many safety nets make exploration almost inconsequential as well in my book. Some people have talked very positively about Drova's pixel art, and I'll give it to them, the game looks amazing. Though I still think Beyond Galaxyland has a stronger artistic vision. And last but not least, there is a little something that I know some of you will take as a serious no-no, a monumental deal breaker. Some of you won't give two shits about it, and yet some others I think will take it as a very positive thing. And it's the fact that this game uses a body type system rather than a sex selector in its character creation interface, which means that you can have a female body with a beard and a female voice, and several other similar combinations. Also know that some people were quick to voice their disapproval of this feature on some Steam threads, and the devs promptly shut down all of them, stating that they knew where these threads end up heading. So there is that, and this, and the fact that it was funded by the Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action as part of the German government's computer funding program. You decide whether any of these things are stuff that you care about or not, but I still think you should know about them as a customer. For me, Drova is just an incredibly overrated title, and nothing about it really did it for me. And that's why I tapped out after a few hours and have no intentions of going back really. At least I have some interest in finishing Space Prison and Rogue Waters, because despite their shortcomings, at least they are somewhat fun to play. But that's not the case with Drova for me. And that's it for me. Those are the 4 RPGs that came out in the year 2024 that just didn't do it for me. But worry ye not, because there are some others that did, and I am going to tell you all about it at some point during this year, hopefully. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, thank you for watching all the way up until now. If you like what you are seeing on this channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell to avoid the usual YouTube shenanigans. Come check us out on Discord if you don't mind all the boomer talk that goes on there. I personally love it and wouldn't change it for anything. And share the video if you thought it was cool. Bye everyone.
You're excused. You can go back to playing video games.